So following the Discovery Health Medical Scheme AGM, I sent an email to Deloitte asking them to manage my expectations of where to from here from the meeting. So when can we have feedback? When are we going to get the minutes of the meeting? And so on. That was on the 23rd of June. We've got about 3 million members on Discovery Health Medical Scheme. So that includes the beneficiaries. We've got 1.3 million principal members. At the AGM, we had just over 200 members attend the online event. 200 members. Of the 1.3 eligible, and I don't really want to say eligible because you're only eligible if you actually registered to actually attend the meeting, essentially. So there was just over 200 members attending the online AGM. And of those 200 odd members, 64 of them were candidates standing for election as trustees. And I was one of them. So very few people participate in the actual voting process. So something that concerns them, they belong to a huge big medical scheme, and a lot of them moan and groan and all kinds of things. But what are they doing? Their participation and involvement lacks in order for them to effect a change. So those that provided me with their proxy, not that we wanted to change anything on Discovery, and as I mentioned in my manifesto, is to take something and make it greater. So sometimes you need to be able to see the wood from the trees, and when you're so heavily involved in certain things, you fail to see what is actually going on or what other things could improve the scheme. So on the day of the AGM, sent that email through to Deloitte, didn't get a response, and I also asked for the individual results of the actual voting process because each candidate is entitled to their individual results. Okay, so that was on the 23rd of June. I got no response. So from the AGM, it just went quiet. As a principal member and as a candidate standing for election, I was sort of left in the dark as to where to from here. In any event, I followed up on the 29th of June, and I mentioned that it's been almost a week since the AGM and still no response. And then they came back to me, okay, because I copied the principal officer as well. Whether that made a difference, I'm not too sure. Dear Mrs. Lindsay, we have to present the audited election results to the Board of Trustees of the scheme within 7 working days after the AGM has taken place. Thereafter, we will notify the candidates. So this is the first time that I, as a candidate, was informed with the expectations. I looked through all their documents, the processes. So, okay, so that was on the 29th of June. On that Monday, I got an email with a letter, and for all those that I held a proxy for, I send it through to them just for FYI and just let them know, thank you for your participation in the whole election process, but I did not come in as a trustee. I thought, well, okay, fine, but who did come in as a trustee? And of these 64 candidates, where did I rank? Who held proxies? And so essentially for me, I was still a little bit uneasy as to the transparency of everything. So I had asked Deloitte, thank you for this, but please make available the individual results of the election showing those that were elected and their votes. Simple. And they came back and said, look, all we can do is we can actually show your votes, but none of the other candidates. So essentially, I don't want to know each and everybody's names. I know who the candidates were, and ideally, it would be nice to actually see how many people at the meeting voted for that person, how many people who held proxies. Eventually, they came back the very next day. They gave me my votes, how many proxies, how many people at the meeting voted for me, and so on. So, okay, but I need some more information. Silence and non-transparency, not just from me, from a number of candidates and principal members, there has to be transparency. So very next day they came back and they said, we've actually received approval from the scheme to provide you with further information. I thought, wow, Okay, so you actually took me seriously, which I'm grateful for. So now they say, well, as published on the Discovery website, deeply embedded in the Discovery website, there's a list of the trustees that were elected. Was Advocate Joan Adams, Mr. Morris Dutoy, and Dr. Max Price. So those are the top 3 candidates. So now trustees, member trustees, that fill the position. And then they provided a table for the votes, including proxy votes. We do not have the authority to share the identities. That's perfectly fine. So I know what the top 3, we all know what the top 3 are who got elected as trustees at the AGM. So having a look at 1 all the way through to 64, I come tie with number 12. So I thought, wow, okay. So you've actually got 13 all the way through to 64 with also a whole number of votes. So in total, the number of votes casted, including the proxies, at the meeting was 1,077. So if you take it, there's 11 candidates before me that received higher votes, and I came in at number 12, which provided me with a little bit more comfort as to this entire process and all the efforts that everybody put in and so on. So I walk away with more comfort for not only myself, but the process that has actually taken place. But I didn't leave it there. There were still things that, as a principal member, as a candidate standing for election, I had to convey my message and my suggestions to the scheme through Deloitte. I thank them for their transparency, and I wish the newly elected trustees well. I think they'll do well in their term, and they weren't nominated for no reason. So I said, please, if I may share my experience from an objective yet subjective point of view with Discovery Health, Deloitte, the next IEB, all in an effort to help. So this was based on my experience as both a principal member and as a candidate standing for election. One of them was to provide more communication around the AGM or any SGM that is actually held. So what essentially happened was there was one email in February that was sent out to 1.3 million members to say AGM is happening where you have an opportunity to nominate and elect trustees and so on. I suggested that they encourage more participation of the 1.3 million principal members who have a right to vote and to participate in something that concerns them and their beneficiaries. So I just found everything was all embedded in Discovery's website, and Discovery is a well-known brand and amazing, and I think it pays to belong to such a good brand. Some people might have reservations as to them feeding off the whole Discovery Health medical scheme to make profits in other ways, although the medical scheme should be an independent party to the administrator. The administrator is Discovery, who administer the Discovery Health medical scheme. But be it as it may. Okay, so what I did suggest was more communication, to set up a separate web page for Discovery Health medical scheme, because currently it's embedded somewhere deep in Discovery's website, and somebody has to go and find it, find the link, or be informed, which they could possibly say, well, we've ticked all the boxes, we've done what we did, but have you done enough in order to make sure that principal members are actively participating in something that interests them? Okay, so that was the one thing. The other thing was to keep candidates and members informed post the AGM. So within reasonable timeframes, to document that. I had nothing in writing to say, well, look, what do I expect from here? Because it just went silent for me as a principal member, but also as a candidate standing for election. Just to keep people informed, to manage their expectations, just that awkward silence and the perceived lack of information I mentioned could create unnecessary perceptions around the process, what is going on in the background, why the silence, so all of that. Just to allow transparency and to provide candidates with comfort It took me on a number of occasions to actually follow up with Deloitte as to what is going on and so on. So, all right. So the other suggestion was that the whole nomination and election process can be held so much more effectively with the great advancements in technology. Those who provided principal members with proxies will know, and those who didn't provide principal members with proxies probably also know, because there's a reason why you didn't follow through with the entire process, because it was tedious. So with the advancements of technology and the awesome sort of facility that they held this online meeting on, you can do this whole process online. There's no reason not to. So instead of printing out, signing the forms of the nominations and the proxies, just to do this online. So if I'm not going to attend the meeting, I want to nominate somebody, I would log into my profile and nominate this one. That gets sent to the person who I nominated, who signs it electronically, allow for that, and boom, Bob's your uncle, and it's all managed. So I'm not an IT person, but I know it can be done. Okay, so that's another suggestion. And then also personal information. Personal information has been shared on many platforms. So even my personal information, I had to give the person who wants to provide me with a proxy my personal information, and they had to give me their personal information in that proxy form, which I had to sign. I could see it. So printing out, scanning, then destroying the printed out version, which is lying in my dustbin unless I tear it up, which I did, just to protect the personal information of people. But now it's still lying on my computer. I have to destroy it because it served its purpose right now. I did suggest that the trustees look at the protection of personal information within this entire process, because so much more can be done with that. In the rules of the scheme, any principal member can hold any number of proxies. And I said, but surely that should be restricted, because it just gives a person unfair advantage. I can go and stand up, and not only me, but perhaps somebody else, and say, well, look, vote for this one, or get a whole number of people to actually vote for me within an organization. Perhaps I'm a director or one of the people within an organization, and everybody says, okay, there's maybe 1,000, 2,000 employees, and people go and complete the forms and submit it. So one of my suggestions was to actually amend the rules to restrict the number of proxies. Now, I know I held a number of proxies as well, but just to limit it to a certain number, argument's sake, 2 proxies per principal member, and to monitor the votes, although that should be done for any one candidate that comes from one particular source. The way I did it was I approached people who I knew, and it was diverse. It wasn't from one particular company or one union or one, argument's sake, brokerage. I don't like the word brokerage. You're either an advisory firm or you're not a brokerage. Brokerage, yeah, you break something. But anyway, so yes, it does create unfair advantage, as any one candidate or someone on their behalf can persuade a group within an organization or union to vote for that particular person standing as trustee. What are trustees' duties? Looking after the interests of members, and they do not act individually. There's a whole number of trustees and trustees employed by the scheme and professionals and so on. So these member trustees, and they also go through an entire screening process. It's not just, okay, well, anybody can vote for anybody, and somebody who's totally unqualified or doesn't know his head from his toes gets nominated and elected as a trustee. So still a rigorous process for any member trustee to be elected. Proper qualifications, proper everything. Okay, experience essentially. So you can have any kind of qualifications, but at the end of the day, if you do not have that understanding of what it means to be a trustee, what governance, and also essentially at the end of the day, you are the member trustee, and you need to think differently about things. So in the induction program, what I found was everybody was focused on governance. And it's like, but when are we going to be talking about the members at the end of the day? So governance should already be in place, but it's not just about compliance and governance. It's more than that. Okay. Anyway, so this is turning out to be a very long video. So for those who are interested, it's there. Otherwise, just fast forward it. That's what I usually do with videos when I look at it later on. So also, just the last thing that I suggested was that when members vote, whether it's for a trustee or voting for resolutions, this can be done outside of the AGM. So remember, rules can be amended. Laws can be changed. Having a law in place doesn't necessarily make it right, and we know that with our history in South Africa. So essentially, whether it's laws, whether it's rules of a body corporate or rules of a retirement fund or a scheme, as long as it's in the best interests of members in the scheme and so on, it's about trustees applying their minds to determine whether this will be beneficial. So my suggestion there was to allow principal members to vote within a period, so not just at the AGM. So give it about a week, and they do not need to register for the AGM. It's nice to attend the AGM where you get feedback and all kinds of things, but people do things in their own time. So yes, the AGM is the official date and time for you to do all of this, but perhaps do it over a period of a week. So you need to vote on 4 things and allow this online facility to take place over a week, as opposed to boom on one day in a few hours. Okay. I'm just mentioning that scheme rules can be amended once the trustees have applied their minds, and it all depends on what the scheme wants to achieve. So with that, I have left that with the principal officer and the trustees, as well as Deloitte, but they did come back and they thanked me for the insights and the suggestions. Deloitte was appointed by the board to run this whole election process, so totally independent from the scheme, and they are putting together a lessons learned document, they mentioned, for discussion with the scheme. And this is where they will also share my comments with the scheme as part of this process. So with that, I hope I've given you enough information